Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, December 30th, 2024, and today we're back from our break and going to talk about grafting tomatoes and organic ag, feeding the world, just like you do when you take 9 days off. So let's do it. All right, y'all. Well, I hope everyone had a nice break this week, if you got one. I celebrated a wedding anniversary with my amazing wife of 13 years. Our oldest had a birthday. We drove to a very cold beach with the kids for a few days, which the kids don't know the difference between a cold and a warm beach, so they enjoyed it thoroughly. And it was altogether restful and fun. I have a lot of love for the beach that I will probably talk about another time, but the ocean is just the best. Oh, and it was the winter solstice this week, so the sun is slowly returning. Props to all of that. We put up a couple videos these last 10 days or whatever it's been since I rambled at you last. One, Jackson reviewed the paper pot transplanter from Neaton, which was great because Jackson came at that as a longtime skeptic of the paper pot system. So really interesting stuff. And the other video was a tour of the FOOP Organic Biosciences biochar facility outside of Washington, D.C., and how they've designed a system that inoculates biochar with the wastewater of fisheries and effectively cleans the water while creating a really helpful agricultural product. I will, of course, link both of those things in the show notes in case you are an audio-only listener to our podcast via our podcast feed. Also, there was a lot of European soccer this week, which we all no doubt watched together in spirit while putting together our respective seed orders. Garden planning and seed orders is another Christmas break tradition for me, so naturally it wasn't all rest. I know that for some, Christmas time is even less restful. Those of you in the southern hemisphere, for instance, or tropical climates are in the near peak of your growing season. And here in the US, depending on your climate and or whether you have external heating of some sort, some folks start their first tomatoes, like around Christmas. We don't have any industrial greenhouse or hoop house heating or any way to plant early tomatoes where we are here in Zone 6B, Kentucky. So we don't start our first tomatoes until late January or early February. Then we usually can graft them by early March or to be planted into the tunnel around the April 1st. It's possible I have not talked about grafting yet with you all, which is wild, but over the last 2 seasons, I trialed some grafted cherry tomatoes versus ungrafted cherry tomatoes, and the difference in production and vigor was just undeniable. It was profound. Now, these are not scientific, rigorous trials. I'm a busy farmer who makes videos and stuff. But they were, just basic field comparisons. And depending on the week, my grafted cherry tomatoes were out yielding by 10 or 20% or more. And then lasting significantly longer than the ungrafted cherry tomatoes. Last year, early blight struck those tomatoes and ultimately wiped out our ungrafted tomatoes in late July, but did not bother our grafted tomatoes, which I ultimately had to kill in November because they just kept going. And that's significant because leaf blights, like early blight, for instance, are not something that grafted tomatoes are purported to help with. Like, that's not the point of them. Grafting is about increasing vigor and decreasing soil-borne pathogens, not foliar ones. Not really what they do. Anyway, I should back up for a second and talk about what grafting is, because although I've had success with it, it's not for everyone. Basically, you're taking a desired fruiting part of the plant, what we call the scion, and connecting it, grafting it, onto another variety that has characteristics you desire, such as disease resistance, or maybe vigor, or maybe, in the case of fruit trees, it's something like height, i.e. dwarf rootstock for apple trees to keep them low for picking. This base serves as the bottom part of the grafted plant, hence rootstock. The big question is, with the added cost of the rootstock seeds and the added cost of the labor to both literally double the number of tomatoes you start and then graft them, is it worth it to graft tomatoes? Well, naturally, there is at least some research on the economics that show that the labor and cost are generally made up for by the gains, so long as you have a good, robust market for the fruit. And for our farm, the grafting has been absolutely unequivocally worth it. However, there is a small catch to our farm. We solely do cherry tomatoes for grafting. So that's something to consider with my experiences. I've never grafted heirlooms or compared them, or slicers, for instance, though I do plan to graft a few this year just for goofs and, I don't know, see how it goes. It's just been for us, we don't have a big enough market for those sorts of things here for the bigger tomatoes. Cherry tomatoes, however, nobody else bothers with because they're not ridiculous like I am. Now, I know that the way I just described it, it sounds like you just take the top off of one and set it on top of the other, but obviously there's a lot more to grafting that I can get into another time, or you can watch the video we did a while back on grafting that I will link in the show notes. All the information in there is still relevant. There are also numerous grafting videos from universities and nurseries online that can be helpful as well. I will be grafting again this March, so I'll probably just talk about the process more then. And I'd also like to try my hand at grafting cucumbers as well and see if I can improve my cucumber production, which is probably my worst crop. I'm just not a good cucumber grower. But obviously, you have to start planting now because, well, you have to start the plants about 2 weeks earlier than you normally would. Start them if you plan to graft them and would like to have the fruit at roughly the same time because the healing process slows the plants down quite a bit. You may also have to start the scion plants at an earlier time than the rootstock plants because the difference in growth speeds, though I have found one, cherry tomatoes grow pretty fast and keep up with the vigorous rootstock plants, but also two, in the case that there is an imbalance in growth, I can kind of steer the growth a bit by moving my rootstock plants to a colder part of the tunnel if they are growing faster than my scion stock. Ideally, you want the plants to be at the same diameter at the stem at the time of grafting. So for regular old slow growing heirlooms, you would likely want to start the desired scion plants. Again, scion means the plants that supply the fruiting half of the plant earlier than the rootstock plants to allow them to mature more evenly. Anyway, if you do try it, just start small, or if you have tried it, share your input, share your experiences. Also, don't bank your entire production on grafting in the first year. If you follow all the instructions that universities and such have put out there and watch the video I mentioned, you should have success. But for real, follow all the instructions. If you're not an instructions following type of person, grafting is probably going to be a superb waste of money and time for you. What I would do if I wanted to try this for the first time is to start your usual tomato crop and then start a grafting crop as well. If the grafts work out, use those and sell the other plants. If they don't work out, then just use the ungrafted plants for your tomato production that year. In fact, I've thought about, but will probably never do because I need a bigger heated greenhouse, selling grafted plants as a business because I'm decent at it and I find it fun, which kind of surprised me. Honestly, when grafted plants first burst on the market garden scene, I was kind of skeptical, which meant that I was frankly annoyed at how comparatively better they have done for us on our farm. But I'm a convert now, at least for my cherry tomato production in the tunnel. The other nice thing about grafting while I'm on this rant is that the grafting is done in March when we invariably have a few cold days, sometimes snow. So it's a good indoor project at a time when we're gearing up but can't do so much outside in the fields. Anyway, more on grafting another time, so make sure you're subscribed. But for the moment, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about can organic agriculture feed the world? Something light. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil is a worker-owned co-op in Cleveland, Ohio, making NOP-compliant living soils for organic growers. Everything from Tilth is compost-based, and they divert around 4,000 tons of food scraps from landfills each year. I have used Tilth Soil for several years now for my plant starts. I love the results. I get consistent germination and consistent growth, plus excellent customer support. It's a lovably nerdy cast of folks who run Tilth. So start your season with excellent germination and strong transplants. Check out Tilth's pre-sale pricing for the 2025 season at tilthsoil.com. That's tilthsoil.com and click Farmers. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider joining the now over 850 people who support it over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come from, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. So today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Bondegard, who writes, quote, "Thank you so much for these daily podcasts. My 3-year-old son Eric picked listening to Farmer Jesse as his daily reward for good behavior. Bet you didn't think that when you started the show." Well, no, I didn't. That's amazing. And hi, Eric. Thanks so much for listening. All right, Bondegard goes on. My question is, most of the internet, even the academic portion of it, still supports the claim that organic practices could never feed the world. Many of the researchers I respect, such as John Kemp, Fred Provenza, and innumerable guests you've had on this channel, claim quite the opposite. I've also seen incredible yields in the community of organic growers I work with, but all of these still seem anecdotal. What do you think about this discrepancy? How did you respond to these claims? Do you think, like many others, that it is the result of poorly designed studies? End quote. So great question. And again, shouts to little Eric. All right, so the debate generally goes, we will have 10 billion people on the planet by 2050, and organic agriculture cannot feed that many people. The yields aren't high enough. There isn't enough organic nitrogen. You'd need more arable land than exists, or so goes the argument. Wrongly, to an extent, but I'll get there. First, though, I often hesitate to weigh in on debates like these because, by and large, whether organic agriculture is capable of feeding the world has less to do with the agricultural techniques and a whole lot to do with the policies and systems and cultures that are extraordinarily difficult to change. For instance, one of the primary debates around this issue is the amount of organic nitrogen is hard to account for, i.e., you can create a lot of nitrogen in a comparatively small space for conventional agriculture, like a factory, but for organic agriculture that relies on compost and fish fertilizers and dried chicken manure or whatever, it's more complicated. Although yes, cover crops can help significantly, and I've not examined every study to see how the studies that refute this idea account for plant nutrients from increased soil organic matter over time, but organic amendments are not as easily produced, generally speaking. Assuming we would need a lot of organic nitrogen to at least convert the world to organic agriculture, that would come down to policy. For instance, in terms of a lack of organic nitrogen, we have 100 billion pounds or more of food going to landfills instead of composters in the US alone, to use that one example. So food waste is potentially one thing that would have to change significantly on a policy level to help meet the nitrogen requirements and also, protect the environment from emissions from landfills. Also, eating habits. We as a world eat a lot of meat and animal products, which are highly dependent on cheap corn and soybeans from arable land. According to a 2017 article published in the journal Nature, quote, a 100% conversion to organic agriculture needs more land than conventional agriculture, but reduces nitrogen surplus and pesticide use, end quote. It goes on to say, however, without a reduction in food wastage and meat consumption and food competing with feed from arable land, i.e. using land to grow food for fuel or feed, it would be difficult to achieve an entirely organic-based farm model. Now, there are researchers who contend that's not the case, that organic ag wouldn't need more land, and there are yield studies that show comparable yields to conventional ag, especially because some of the negative studies are comparing land that was previously conventionally farmed with conventional land and being like, look, the newly organic land is not as productive, which, yeah, duh. Like farming with biology takes biology and soil organic matter and structure, et cetera. So yeah, I hesitate to weigh in on things like this because the problem isn't entirely about agriculture as much as it is about just changing the studies and also potentially changing the entire world first. And I will remind you, this is a sports podcast. There is a bit of an argumentative fallacy with this idea as well that always grinds my gears a bit. Billions of people are undernourished currently, and a huge portion of the crops we grow go to feeding livestock. So we are not currently feeding the world conventionally, organically, or otherwise. We're not even really trying that hard. It's somewhat difficult to see that fact changing by the 2050s or whenever we reach 10 billion people. And again, a lot of that is policy and culture, not necessarily agriculture. Also, this doesn't factor in groundwater pollution, ecological destruction, algae blooms, or any of the peripheral issues that come from factory/conventional farming and affect human health. It's also hard to grow food without topsoil that blinds people in dust storms and kills drivers almost every year, or in a degraded environment, not to mention significant concerns for things like declines in phosphorus supplies required for conventional ag, among other issues. So it's difficult to imagine, in effect, conventional farming holding up the global food supply all on its own either. All right, I'm going to continue on this subject for a few more minutes. So first, we'll take a quick break and then discuss some thoughts on what could potentially feed the world. Be right back. Okay, so continuing on with the organic and feeding the world thing, I want to emphasize that farming methods certainly play a huge part, but farmers cannot be solely responsible for addressing these issues based on how they farm because one, farmers just grow what the market demands or what the government will support. And two, how people farm cannot directly address things like food insecurity and what people do with their food waste or what they demand for their diets on a large scale. Moreover, when people pin organic, which is quite restrictive, to be frank, against conventional, which means every practice but organic, it shuts down the more important question, which is if we dropped our dogmas about these things and encouraged more contextual ecological food production, then could we feed the world? Run the study that compares the yields and efficacy of ecologically centered conventional growers who may not be certified organic and may even occasionally use a small amount of herbicide to terminate a cover crop while also growing diversely and without heavy tillage or nutrient applications, etc. So add that to organic and run those things against conventional. Can that make a dent in any yield lost or land used? I'm not the first person to point out that a less dogmatized, hybridized system would be the best approach. And it makes me think of a lot of the folks that I've met at the Acres USA conferences, for instance, who maybe are not organic, but are doing some really cool stuff in terms of ecology and soil health, large-scale cover cropping, animal integration, strip tillage, etc. Wouldn't you rather have your food come from someone who understands and appreciates soil, air, and water on that level, even if they used a small, often decreasing amount of herbicide? I mean, herbicide is not anything I would ever use or promote, but if someone was growing an enormous amount of food and largely improving the environment and ecology around their farmland, but having to occasionally use that just to ensure they get a good product, I'm fine with that. We have to be, but you just can't call it organic. Moreover, people get better and better at growing every year, more creative, more driven, more productive. Yes, organic ag has been around. Well, none of us would be here if it wasn't for chemical-free agriculture, but in the modern capitalistic feed 10 billion people context, it's pretty nascent. So we haven't yet really seen what farmers can really do within the confines of chemical-free or regenerative ag in terms of yields, especially not with like 10 or 20 years experience. Also, land is just too darn expensive. Expletive removed there for little Eric, for the most brilliant up-and-coming growers to even try large-scale ecological practices. I'm throwing that one in there, not just because to me, what organic ag or even these ecological hybrids can do on a large scale is still a bit unknown, but also because, again, it ain't the farmer's responsibility to reduce land gobbling by wealthy tax evaders and farmland development into neighborhoods. That's a policy thing. So I hate that argumentative fallacies like this shut down the enormous concern raised here that if we really want to quote unquote feed the world, it does not necessarily start with how the food is grown, at least not how it's grown currently. However, it also could be done in a really amazing ecological way that would not just feed the world, but revitalize it. Because conventional fence row to fence row ag ain't going to do that. Okay, well, there is so much I could say about this, and there are whole pieces of this argument that deserve their own segments. The fragility of monoculture and factory farming, the dangers of the chemicals produced to their residents near those industries, the agricultural secretary, Earl Get Big or Get Out Butts, and his involvement in this idea, an upstanding man who was forced to resign for racist remarks and was convicted of tax evasion, and could be a whole segment on his own for his negative impacts on agriculture. But I'll leave it there for now, and feel free to add your 2 cents in the comments section. I certainly could have organized my thoughts on this better, but hopefully I got the gist out there, or maybe not. I've been on vacation. Anyway, I missed you all, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your Monday. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No-Till Growers. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or if you just sign up in the month of December, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Jennifer Askew, Christian Cody, John, Jason Kopek, Rusty, D. Bolton. Didn't want to combine those. I didn't want it to be Rusty D. Bolton. Although that's pretty good. That's a pretty good novelistic name. Anyway, Rusty, D. Bolton, Chand, Peter B., and Ryan P. And we got one more. Hold on. Lynn Tompkins. This one, in this story, this is an entire camera crew, a lighting crew on a new movie they're shooting in Georgia. And they slowly come to realize that everything that happens in the movie is actually happening in real life the very next day, which is wild because the movie they're shooting is Nightmare on Elm Street, the musical. Yeah. So that's great. Anyway, thanks for watching and/or listening. We'll see you tomorrow for New Year's Eve. Great to be back.